Take your seat. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for still being here at this penultimate session today. It's, as Adam said, it's a good day to be talking about diversity in business. It's International Women's Day, and as I think you'll all acknowledge, a revolution is going on in the world at the moment. It's not just broad societal trends like Me Too and Time's Up and the flood of allegations against various varieties of behaviour by men in power. But also in business, there are a number of initiatives going on, particularly the gender pay gap reporting requirements, which I'm sure a number of your companies will have fallen within the scope of. And these initiatives, I think, really are coinciding to create an incredibly important moment for business in terms of how we can create a more diverse, more productive, more effective and fairer workplace in the future. As Adam said, I'm the business editor at the FT. I write more about diversity than my editors would like. But I'm very pleased indeed to be talking to this panel today who bring a variety of experience from different kinds of businesses. One of the things that I find when I talk to businesses on this issue is that there is enormous hunger for best practice, sharing of best practice between companies. There are an enormous number of policies that you can follow. Some are more effective than others. And what I'm going to try to do very much today is focus on practical things, practical tips for you in the room. And obviously we're running a bit late, so we will try to leave time for questions at the end. If I can start with you, Funke. I mean, how important have the gender pay gap reporting requirements been in terms of increasing focus on the issue of gender diversity and thus on behaviour within business?
Thank you. I think that it's a key development. I mean, obviously it doesn't apply to all companies. It's companies of a certain size, etc., but you can't move away from the fact that it is really important to have the data out there and for there to be transparency and awareness around just how acute the issue can be across different industries. So I'm really encouraged by that requirement.
And do you think that it will actually change companies' policies or behaviour around diversity?
One would hope so, because of course with the transparency and the obligation to report, companies are being quite careful about how they position their statements, I'm finding, and putting as positive a spin on it as they can. And, you know, there is an obligation there to say, okay, we have a problem, but what are we going to do about it? No one wants to just report that the issue is what it is. And that's where transparency can really drive action.
Chris, I know at Sky you've been pursuing a range of diversity policies for a number of years. Can you share with us some of what you find to be most effective, but also highlight some of the things that haven't worked quite so well?
I think you're right. It's a range of things. The one thing that we've learned at Sky and the hard way, because we tried to push diversity for a number of years, and only really 2 years ago do we start to have some success. And I think of it like a recipe, and it started certainly from the top of the organisation with our CEO, Jeremy Darroch, basically putting out there that we were going to go after a complete gender parity at Sky. And he made that very clear to the organisation. I think you need that, otherwise you sort of don't get as much momentum from across the organisation. And then we put in place a number of things, some of the things we've discussed outside. We fixed our recruitment approach, everything from changing the way that our ads look to the wording, so they were sort of more attractive to women. Sky had a bit of an aggressive and abrasive reputation, so we had to fix that. We put in place 50-50 shortlists. We put in place sponsorship schemes where we had our senior women sponsored by our top leaders. We put in place flex work. We put in place a lot of communication. So there's no one single thing, and I think that's what puts companies off, that they don't realise they actually have to do a basket of stuff to start seeing some movement in the numbers.
Sam, if I can turn to you now. I mean, somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago that if you solve for gender, i.e. if you introduce a number of policies to improve the gender diversity of your workforce, you also magically make yourself a much more attractive place for millennials to come and work, and indeed to stay working. Do you think that's true, and if so, why?
I think that's very true, but I don't think it just applies to millennials. So my company is a robotics company, heavy engineering, almost all engineers, only 3 non-technical roles. And people come to engineering companies now, they're looking for a diverse team. And the reason why they're looking for that diversity is because they want an interesting culture. And they want to build a product that has been made from lots of different experiences, so it's more robust, it's been well thought out, it's not just coming from one perspective. So they take real pride in that experience on the team. But also our traditional engineers, the career engineers that we've welcomed to the team from Rolls-Royce and Dyson and McLaren, these are people with 40 years of engineering experience. And they are looking for cultures that are different from their all-male engineering departments and entire floors at Rolls-Royce where there isn't a single woman. So yeah, I think it's really important to millennials because it's a much nicer environment to work, but it's also really important for career engineers too.
And Fleur, you were saying outside that you've got some quite you've introduced some quite innovative ways of retaining talent as well as recruiting it into your company. And did say also I should point out to everyone that Fleur's son is actually in the audience, who's at 18 months into an apprenticeship programme, and it's great to see some of your practices being experienced in the room itself.
Thank you.
What have you done at PetXI?
Well, one of the things that I've done is to look at the issues in the way that you would look at any business problem that you would solve. So if you had something within the business, within your product, within your service, you wouldn't just say, oh well, you know, it's not working. So when it comes down to the childcare aspect, I was about to lose somebody from my team who was a very good employee, but she was a single mother and she couldn't sort out the childcare. So looking at it as a business problem, well, you know, we've got to sort it out. So we've got free childcare all through the holidays for staff so they can bring their children in. And it's fantastic because one of the things that I really feel that we need to do more of is to have good role models, because my role model is actually here in the audience today, and it's Louise Bennett, Chief Executive Coventry and Warwickshire Chamber. And she was a fantastic role model to me because she was a woman who was achieving, and I think we need more role models. So for children to actually go into their parents' work, see their parents actually doing a job really well, actually they have lunch with them, so they can have lunch with them and then they can go back to their work. So it's a very good atmosphere. So I think the sense of being able to go to work with your parent and see other people doing a good job as well. So they may spot a lady who does events, for example, and think, oh, that looks really interesting. So we have spin-offs into work experience, which is really, really valuable, I think, for the young people. But also we have different approach like to snow days. So when it's a snow day, people bring their children into work.
Feels quite relevant with last
definitely,
week.
Definitely.
Fresh in all our memories.
But it's just a way of breaking the rules and starting the rules again. And I think we do need this sense. And I think I've got a huge commitment to this as a woman, because I feel that I've got to really put my money where my mouth is. And I had the benefit, I've got 3 children that I worked with all the time. I'd take them to meetings with a bank manager. I've now got 500 staff at my company that I started. But in the early days, they used to come everywhere with me. And it's obviously, you know, it's not put my son off. He's now joined the business, which has been fantastic. But I think we've got a responsibility to other women to actually celebrate what they do, bring their children on board and actually make it a possibility that they can work. And it isn't an issue because, oh, it's snow day, I've got my children off school. Bring them in, you know, let them see how marketing works. Let them see how the sales process works. Let them have some fun as well. I mean, we have got trainers in the company, obviously, so it's slightly easier for us. But I think this is the sort of thing women should be pushing for and saying, no, you know, we've got to have new rules for us. So here we go, you know, let's make them.
Yes. A question for several panel members, really. One of the things when I talk to companies, I'm very struck by how companies are very much on different ends of the spectrum. You've got some companies who very much understand the business case for diversity and are putting in place effective policies to make their workforces more diverse. And then on the other hand, you have companies where really it's still a tick box exercise. And certainly business doesn't, on the whole, I'm sure you'd all in the audience agree, business doesn't like more government intervention than is absolutely necessary. But a question for all of you, perhaps starting with Chris. I mean, what is the role of government in this? Should government be sanctioning companies that aren't improving their gender pay gap, for example, or is it up to companies themselves?
I think for me it should come from the companies. I think government have a role in pushing things like the gender pay gap reporting to raise the focus. I wouldn't go so far that I think government should basically stipulate that companies need to do this, because there is an element that you need to bring people along with you, and I think if things get forced, you end up sort of fast-tracking in an inappropriate way. I mean, certainly when we look to improve the sort of gender numbers at Sky, we always go for the best people for the role, regardless of the fact that we push for a 50-50 candidate list. And if we've often heard the sort of negative of sort of gender discrimination, which actually puts off the rest of your organisation. So I think you have to have a balanced approach. I think it has to come from the company, but I do agree with Fleur, you have to change some of the rules, and if you keep on doing the same thing that you did in the years in the past, you're not going to change anything. So you have to take a different, more ambitious and more bold approach, and government's there really just to keep you honest, I think.
What do you think, Funke? I mean, you have a lot of experience, for example, of the legal profession, which is a famously diverse profession, not. And I mean, do you think that sanctions have any place in this whole debate?
What's actually worked within the solicitors profession, of which I'm a very proud member, is having the Law Society, our membership organisation, really committing to this agenda. So all solicitors are members of the Law Society. There are about 170,000 of us, covering a vast range of different employers. And the Law Society has done a great job of having toolkits available. There's a great diversity and inclusion team on hand. Best practice is, shared openly. There's a diversity and inclusion charter where over 400 law firms of varying sizes and different practices have all committed to improving on their practices. The Law Society supports initiatives like the First 100 Years Project. So next year will be 100 years since women were considered to be persons and able to practice law.
Some women.
Some women were considered to be legally persons, which I find highly insulting. But we're celebrating that, and we're building up a bank of stories and a digital library that's going to be archived, and that's with the Law Society support, so that women can be inspired by those who came before them. So the membership organisation has a key part to play on this when you have a disparate group of different types of organisation.
And Sammy, I mean, one of the things that, for example, the 30% Club, which campaigns, for those of you who are not familiar with its work, it campaigns for greater representation of women in senior corporate leadership. They believe that policies around improving gender diversity are going to really help make workforces more broadly diverse, that it will help solve some of the issues around very low representation, for example, of ethnic minorities on boards. Do you think that's true? I mean, are policies around gender really helpful in opening the door to minorities?
Absolutely, and I think the main issue there is visibility, and this idea of role models, as you mentioned before, of having someone trailblazing and paving the way for you and seeing that career path. So if you don't see these people in these roles, you don't imagine yourself ever sitting at the table, and you don't think, that could be me and I'm going to work towards that, if you're constantly seeing one demographic always getting the promotion. And I think people who think of these policies as box ticking, it's really damaging, and they're not understanding the real benefit diversity adds to the financials of your company, the happiness of your team, the development of your product. It's a really narrow mindset, and it's bad for business.
But Professor Iris Burnett, who's done very interesting work on this at Harvard, she talks about the effectiveness of changing processes rather than mindset. So, as you were saying, Chris, if you change the language of job ads, you change the people you attract to apply for a job. But she also says, and I think we should be honest about it, that working in diverse teams is often really difficult. It's often more difficult to work in a team of people with diverse views to you than to sit with your comfortable group of people who look like you and sound like you. How do you think, Fleur, that we sort of overcome that difficulty? Because in the businesses I talk to, it's a very genuine one.
Well, I'm very lucky because our business is based in Coventry and we've got very, very good diversity there, and we've got very good, Chamber of Commerce is very good for actually promoting and lobbying, and I think this sort of thing really helps when you've got that really good infrastructure and a really good network. It's very, very good. But I think mainly it's about celebrating the differences. I mean, we've got a lot of, we're hugely diverse, gender, and also, different community groups, different ethnicities. We've got everybody. I mean, it really is a really wonderful environment. We've got all ages as well. We've got people from 16 to 75. It's a fantastic place. And I think it's when you start focusing on the positive and celebrating the differences and actually bringing people in who are different. And yes, you will have some very interesting conversations that they probably don't run in a smooth and in a very contained way. But the sort of things that you get coming out of it, like you were saying with the sort of productivity, the difference when you've actually got these amazingly different people who've come up through all different walks of life and they've got such different perspectives on things, you get a very, very powerful and very strong result in terms of the actual business product or service. So for me, it's very, very good for business, having all different sorts of people involved, all different people with all different problems. We're all basically on a journey, but we've got it from different perspectives, and that's helped us in business very much, helped us to grow.
I know that Chris, Sky, like the Financial Times, has not yet reported its gender pay gap, but what do you think the next steps should be? I mean, there's a consultative, in fact the process is closed, but the Corporate Governance Code is going to be adapted to put a far greater emphasis on diversity and inclusion. But what do you think the government should do with the data that's coming out of the gender pay gap reporting exercise?
Like I said before, and I think we all agree, if they can keep us honest, they actually communicate how different sectors are doing, and just continue the conversation, because for me, and the gender pay gap reporting, as we all know, it sort of gets a bit confused sometimes, because there's equal pay, which everyone should be equal paid for the same job, and then there's basically the gender pay gap, which means that you just haven't got an equal balance of women and men, which we're all trying to achieve. And once you sort of understand that and everyone gets behind it and drives for this sort of gender parity, that's where the government should be continually driving towards and making sure that the conversation is going. As I said before, I'm not sure I believe in them stipulating rules to get people over the line.
But do you think, I mean, Funke, what you were saying about the Law Society, I mean, perhaps a more formalised sharing of best practice across sectors might arise out of the exercise? I mean, do you think there's arguments to be made for some sort of intervention by government in this field?
There is an argument for it, but the willingness still needs to come from the organisations themselves. They need to feel that there is something in it for them. There has to be a win in it for them. And the way I look at it is that win could vary hugely depending on what the organisation, what stage they're at. It could be about the war on talent. It could be about attracting more women in the first place. It could be more about retaining women. Different organisations have very, very different issues they're dealing with. And I'm a bit reluctant to say that we're looking for the government to somehow force organisations to do it. There has to be a willingness to do it in the first place.
Yes, I meant less sanctions and more perhaps sharing of best practice, that we now have greater transparency over the numbers and the reasons behind the numbers than we've ever had before.
Because that empowers organisations then.
Yes,
They can see what the tools are, what's worked for other organisations, and they can see that it actually is possible to drive the change.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that employers worry about a lot, and I'm sure this will be a concern that's shared by many of you in this room, is a lack of available talent and skills for the roles that they need to fill. And this, many have argued to me, makes it very difficult, makes it more difficult to create diverse workforces because you're already limited in terms of the skill set that you need, and then we're not, as we know, we're not producing enough STEM graduates full stop. We're certainly not producing enough female STEM graduates. I mean, do you think that, is that an issue for you in your industry? And is it something that you think needs to be addressed by changes in the education system, or is it something that employers themselves can address?
Well, personally, I think a lot of it is about role models. So we need to get girls to actually see women performing and succeeding and really celebrate this success. So for me, a lot of it is about, yes, it's about schools. I mean, we work across the whole range. So we work in schools, we work with community groups. A lot of the work we've been doing recently is about getting women back into work after career breaks because their IT skills have fallen behind. So I think it's very much about addressing the problem as you see it. So it may be in school, definitely role models. Places like the Careers and Enterprise Company, I think, have got a part to play, getting businesses to link up and actually provide these really good, strong work experience opportunities. So I think it's very much about seeing women succeed, and I think it's very much about us all as men and women celebrating that success and using it as a way for people to see, you know, like you were saying, if you've seen that, if you've seen somebody succeeding, like with me, you know, seeing Louise, it's like, yeah, I want to be a businesswoman. I could do that. It's something real. It's not something that you've got no concept of how it would pan out. So I think having somebody that's actually trailblazing and moving forward into that unknown land, and then mentoring is hugely important. So I think businesses have got a real responsibility to actually mentor people who want to go into certain careers. So I think getting involved with local schools, work experience, really working hard to upskill staff. I mean, we had interviews, we had these amazing women coming in, and this is when we started with the upskilling programme, because a lot of them just had not got the IT skills, and it seemed like such a terrible waste. And they're talking about by 2030, there'll be 200,000 jobs in Coventry and Warwickshire that we can't fill because of the skills gap. So I think upskilling, really focusing on where those skills are needed and really investing in skills as companies, that's hugely important.
One of the things that's debated a lot, John Amici, who's a psychologist and a former basketball player, who some of you may know, and he said at a conference where we were discussing this, he said, forget unconscious bias, it's conscious bias we need to worry about. I mean, Chris, have you had... how effective have you found unconscious bias training to be at Sky?
So it was one of the things we tried, and we had John come and talk at one of our events, and he took us to task on that. So I hope to believe that the balance of everything we do has dealt with conscious and unconscious bias. And we talk a lot about our philosophy of driving for gender diversity as just a sort of philosophically the right thing to do. And I think, to your questions about whether it should be business or the government, I do think there's a responsibility on businesses now just to almost stop talking about this as a thing that we need to do. It should be just BAU now. There's absolutely no reason why, if we've got 50% of the country that are women, that there shouldn't be complete diversity throughout. And for me, I actually see it as an opportunity, because if a company doesn't talk about it like that, you won't attract the talent, you won't keep your talent, and that's where the opportunity comes from a business's perspective. So conscious bias is absolutely there, and for me it's an opportunity to go after and really tackle up front.
Well, I've got loads more questions, but I have promised that we'd have a brief opportunity for questions for the audience. So if you've got questions for the panel, please raise your hand. We've got two there. If we go to the woman in blue and then the gentleman two along from her, please.
Good afternoon. This morning there was discussion about education and how we need to bring, excuse me, I was getting nervous when I have to ask questions, voice goes, awareness of opportunity. And I think we all fail our children because it's all about exams and not even, let alone university courses, what you can do once you're finished. I just looked it up. What percentage of engineering students in this country do you think are female? It's 15. It's 2018. You can't fill your gap because you can't even get the women in the courses. But no one, I have friends in independent schools, top, you know, St. Paul's girls, they're not told about doing engineering. They're not given examples of the roles that are out there. And I'm leaving today and thinking who I need to write to, because I think it behooves all of us to work out how we influence policy such, I mean, my current idea is... Can
I get you to ask a question?
Sorry, the question is, bearing in mind if they're not educated, how do we, if they don't have the skills we need, how do we train them? So do you feel that it's important to somehow build within the education system the awareness of options and skills, and how do you do that?
Yeah,
we can all say it's important, but how do you do it?
I mean, I think perhaps you know, what you as companies and as employers can do on that would be very useful to hear. Who would like to? Everyone.
Why don't you go for it?
Fleur.
Well, we work with schools. We work with 25,000 young people every single year, and it is a real issue. And we've got very involved with there's very practical things you can do, and one of the things we're doing is we've actually teamed up with the Wasps, which is the netball, they do rugby and netball, and we've teamed up with them because they've got some fantastic, the women are really, really amazing role models, and so we've actually teamed up to do a STEM program using all of their suppliers. So there's JLR, there's Under Armour, there's all these people who work with them, and we're actually getting the STEM message out to schools. So we also did a road show, taking a bus all around the country talking about opportunities. Ada Lovelace, Coventry University got involved, and we're talking about the different things they're doing to promote science. So there's things you can do like that, which are very, very important. But for me, it's all about role models, and it's all about quality work experience. So I think that is truly where we have a responsibility as companies. We've got a true commercial community responsibility. It's not just about the commercial angle. I think, you know, we've got to take the community responsibility and say we have got to do our bit as companies to actually make young people aware of these opportunities, bring them into businesses. That's why it's so important that we've got the young people involved within the company, because we can show them different things about marketing and logistics and different elements of the business. And I think, for me, role models and quality work experience.
And I actually think this is one area that government can probably help a lot more than they're doing, and working with schools just more generally to raise awareness, like you say, about the importance of these kind of subjects to the girls. But similarly to Fleur at Sky, we've done everything from running an academy where we bring local schools in all our operations in to learn about engineering. And then we've gone further up the sort of food chain in some respect, where we're actually training in those areas that we're particularly short of women candidates in technology, which everyone will be aware of, but also in home service engineers, so people who go and put Sky into customers' homes, where we've actually had to go and develop training schemes to re-skill women who either want a change in career or have never thought about doing something in technology. So my view is you have to do something at every level. Unfortunately, I think it is going to be a long-term game, because you have to start at the root cause in schools, and that's where probably government need to pull their weight a bit more.
Did either of you want to intervene?
I've got two notes on that. First, I think you have to start a lot younger, and I think language is really key, and how we talk to children, girls and boys. You're a pretty princess, you're a strong leader. That's just obvious, and the toys they get to play with. Lego is perfect example of that. More girls should be playing with Lego if you want them to develop this interest in STEM. And the second point is this, so there's actually 9% of women in engineering, so there's a drop-off after graduates. And a big problem, and not something that's actually come up on this panel, is actually the environment as it exists now for women engineers, and the drop-off, the number of women who leave technology, and how we're not doing anything to fix the environment for them. And so there isn't, why would a graduate want to enter that industry when it's got this toxic culture at the moment? So there's a lot to do before we start encouraging more women into this space.
The only thing I would add to that is the schools point, and I would move it away from the organisation's responsibility and challenge every single one in this room to sign up to an organisation like Speakers for Schools, who are always crying out for professionals and entrepreneurs and business people just as yourselves to volunteer, to go in once a year to a school in this country and share your story, share your what you've done, how you got to where you are, and so on. There is huge impact in that alone. It's remarkable the difference that can make.
Yes, it is a wonderful organisation, Speakers for Schools, despite being run by rival journalist Robert Peston. We'll just take one more question, and I said we'd go to this gentleman here.
Thank you. I'm, David Joel. I'm the president of the Hampshire Chamber of Commerce. I don't think anybody would disagree that diversity is key for business success. One of the things that concerns me slightly is whenever we discuss diversity, we inevitably follow the gender issue. And that is a big issue for all the reasons you've suggested. But there are other issues at play here. We have issues of diversity of age, experience, ethnicity, tech savvy. And we can't lose sight of the fact that we need diversity of thought in business. So my question to the panel, if you're going to ask me, the question to the panel is, whilst we've had very much a gender-centric discussion, what's your view on the other aspects of diversity, and should we have an equally forthright assault on those?
Who'd like to start?
Yes. Well, as a black woman, obviously, I do a lot of work around race as well as gender. We're focusing on gender, of course, because it's International Women's Day. And I do social mobility related work across the legal profession as well. And intersectionality is a big thing now. You can be black, female, and gay. You can be, so it becomes more complicated the more layers you add on. The issues are slightly different also. And the barriers are slightly different, but I do agree that you do need to treat each of these diversity strands quite separately, actually, because they're different issues. We're running out of time, so I'm just conscious of that.
Can I get someone to talk about what we were speaking about outside, which is this idea of strength-based interviews that are based on people's potential rather than their experience, which can be enormously helpful. Yeah.
That's very relevant to us because we take on a lot of people without skills and we skill them up. So we're a training company. We work with all different sorts of people who may not be interested in education at all. So it's very important they've got the character to engage. So for us, it's about spotting that character and that potential and then getting the skills that may be needed to actually be able to do the job. And I think it's almost like you need to put the thing into a soft focus because there's a lot of people in their late 60s to mid 70s at our place and also from 16, and that creates, because we are a family business, it started off as a family business and it still is essentially a family business, and I think you always want to retain that sense of family because then you've got this mentoring, you've got the older people or the more experienced people or the younger ones training up the older ones in the IT, and I think that for me is really important. So you're looking at the person, you're saying, okay, we can build these skills, we can train you up. A lot of our older staff have had their first qualification through the NVQ route and through the apprenticeship route. So that for me has given us a very strong and very diverse business which has kept us really solid through some difficult times.
Chris, Sammy, do you want to come in on this?
I completely agree, Frank. That's everything.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry we can't take more questions, but we have come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank the panel very much indeed and hope to be back next year with progress to report.